Good morning, everyone. It's Clarissa, Marie.
Good morning.
And John.
Hello.
And already I'm having debacles with my slide. Wednesday, I don't think
No, it's not raining. Spectacular.
It was a bit miserable when I woke up, but the sunrise was really good. If you can hear us, can you let us know that you're there? Can you let us know that you can hear us? I'm excited today because I noticed when I went to have a look at who's registered, I've got a whole lot of people listening from New Zealand, which
Welcome.
I think is a bit of a first. I'm a bit of a she's not coming. Things New Zealand.
Well,
and going over there in a couple of weeks. Agree with me.
For the first time in history, the tide of migrations between the two countries is turning, and more Australians are moving to New Zealand than New Zealanders
Nice.
moving to Australia.
Nice. So, yes, welcome. Today, next in our webinar series, we're talking about the common mistakes that I guess we've seen, that I'll speak for myself, that I may have been a part of, where things go wrong, some of the challenges that we face when we're doing collaborative work. And I think what happens a little bit is you go and you learn the theory, you get really excited, you think this stuff's going to be really easy because people are being really nice and they're agreeing not to go to court. And then probably in your first matter, you get 2 or 3 meetings in and you realize pretty quickly that this is hard. And I guess what I want to say from that outset is mistakes are pretty normal. And the only way we learn and the only way this stuff develops is through us making mistakes and then reflecting and going, oh, with the benefit of hindsight, I would never have done that. I would have tried something different. So today, that's what we want to talk to you about, is some of the things that we've seen, that we've done, that we've heard about, where things can go wrong. And I guess as a part of that, give you some tips on how you can avoid them. So today I've got my good friend Anne-Marie, my co-webinar presenter as always, here with me. But we also have our special guest today.
You can't hear me because I'm just sitting here shaking my head, being the first time I've seen these slides.
John sent me a headshot. It was just not a great one. It was pixelated. It was ruining my graphics. So I went, I'm using a caricature. You should never have sent that
She
to me.
keeps telling me that, but I don't know what pixelated means.
Blurry. You look very handsome.
So John and I have done a lot of work together, a lot of teaching together. Most of the time we're good friends. Today he doesn't like me so much because I've used his caricature. But I think my view anyway is that John's one of the most experienced collaborative professionals we have here in Queensland, has been involved in a huge number of cases in the role of a financial neutral. But today I don't so much want to talk about the role of a financial neutral, even though I have John here. I want to just talk about collaborative and tap into his knowledge base broadly around that. So welcome, John, to Collaborative Webinar Land.
Thank you. And can I say that this is, it's been enjoyable for me not talking about the financial side, because what the collaborative has done from my workspace is to completely change how I work. Over the last, let's just say 25 years, I won't count the extra bits. Over the last 25 years, working as a forensic accountant, it's a very cold exercise. We're given instructions and we go away, do our stuff, then we lob a report in, and that usually causes more trouble than it's worth. What the collaborative role has given me is a different way to add value. But more than that is to actually sit in a room with other professionals and to learn a great deal from them and how they work. Clarissa talked before about, we're always learning. I think the matters I'd say that haven't gone as well as we would have liked are probably the ones we've probably rested on our laurels a little bit and just gone in there and just done what we've done without actually really planning and thinking. And it's always a bit of a slap in the face when that happens and you jump straight back on that bandwagon and start learning again, which is it's good. It never stops.
All right. So I just wanted the tech side of today, a couple of things that Anne-Marie and I have learned doing a few of these now. If you're trying to run a whole myriad of programs on your computer, there's a strong chance at some stage you will drop out and you will lose your connection. So if that's you, just drop out, log back in, and you'll pick us back up where you are, or get out of all of those other programs and hang out with us for an hour and listen to us chat and ask us questions. Please do send your questions through as we go. I am no technical guru, but most of the time they come through, and I think everyone should be able to see them, hopefully, as we go. All right, let's keep going. Where do things go wrong? So when I was madly preparing this, in my head there are about 4 different key areas where things I think go wrong. And the first one for me was the most obvious. We lawyers just go back to being lawyers. So most of us coming into collaborative have been lawyers for a long time. We're taught certain things when we come into law land. There are certain traits that are very effective, particularly if you do litigation. And my view is, to be frank, it's just easier sometimes to resort back to some of that stuff. It is easier to send a letter about something than to have a difficult conversation. It's easier to be a bit positional, and particularly when we're backed into a corner and we feel like things are getting hard. Speaking for myself, they're the traits that I know within myself come out really quickly, and it can be really hard to control them and to contain them and to pull them back in. So
I think you will have all heard me say this before in our webinars. I have never done a collaborative matter that hasn't been enormously challenging in so many personal ways. The law, once you've been doing it for a decade or two, doesn't really change. But it's a constant checking of how I'm functioning in the process that I find really challenging. And that temptation to revert to type is so easy to give into before you even know that you've done it. And that is one of the most thoughtful, and Clarissa and I always use that word, this is deeply thoughtful work, the most thoughtful components of collaborative practice. And in a way, lawyers are both the frustration and also the best source of support if you can let yourself go and connect with the other lawyer that way. That's hugely difficult.
I'd throw in there also accountants will be accountants. When I started doing this work, everyone sort of started explaining how it's not a huge, we talk later about paradigm shift, it's not a huge journey for accountants acting in the role of neutral. Because this is what we normally do. We normally act for 2 clients. It was only after doing this work for a couple of years it dawned on me that we are so set in our ways after doing this for so long that we prejudge everything. So, we automatically launch into, you can't hold on the house because the house is not income producing, therefore it doesn't make sense to keep it. The husband keeps the business because he's got the background in the business. We have all of these preconceived ideas. And what sort of dawned on me later on is we're having all these preconceived ideas without necessarily thinking about the interests of the clients. And when I opened my mind up to what this real interest-based negotiation is about, what we're trying to achieve and what the client's purpose in this process is, it really changed how I viewed my role.
I want to talk a bit about the problem of interests, which is something that I'm encountering in a couple of matters that I have at the moment, and how they are manifesting themselves in a way that I haven't seen before, again, which turns new matters into really challenging, confronting matters. But I wanted to also just think about calling things mistakes. Because we're all driven type A personalities, we want every process to be perfect and not hit any glitches. Reverting to type is going to happen, but it isn't necessarily a mistake unless you stay there. Knowing that you've wandered down into those dark woods is far more insightful and beneficial to the matter than just merrily going down that path and saying, oh, well, this is what we've morphed into.
Yeah.
One of the challenges about lawyers, I find, is that you can be in a deeply collaborative space and the other practitioner might not be quite so invested in that process. And that can be not because of their own issues, but because of their clients. And again, being able to share that with the practitioner on the other side becomes so enormously helpful, because when I revert to type, I think it's all about the lawyer and that they're not wrangling their client or they're not reminding their client enough about the process. But sometimes they're doing all of that and the client cannot hear it or won't hear it.
Very true. One of the other areas that I think we fall into traps in is when we stop following the process. So again, it's a little bit of reverting to type, but we find a shortcut, or we think, oh, we can't organise a meeting for 8 weeks because people are travelling around and it's difficult, so let's do it this way instead. We revert to sending the emails because that'll just be quicker and easier. I don't know, whatever it is, but we step out of the process.
Someone runs out of money.
Yes.
This seems like we bogged down in negotiations.
Yes.
This seems like a better way. Do an exchange.
Yeah. And look, sometimes stepping out of the process or perhaps adapting or adopting some slight variation of a process can actually be really successful, but it can also potentially create a bit of a disaster if you're not careful and really thinking about what you're doing.
But I think the difference with what you're talking about there is it can be an advantage. It can actually work. That's where the teams get together and talking about it. I think the matters where we've stepped away from the process, we haven't kept the clients necessarily informed, or the other parties necessarily, the other practitioners necessarily as informed as they should have been or we should have. I think that's where it starts going wrong. I think where the team sits down and says, we've got a problem, how are we going to do it? And then you customise the process. I think that can definitely work well, but it needs to be that team approach.
So that's that question of buy-in. Who is diverting from the process and why? And if the team is, because the process has got a bit hard, it's much more challenging to bring the clients with you, I think. If you're saying to the clients, here's an impasse, here are some options, which one do you want? And they buy into the alternate and understand what they're giving up, then you create a totally different dynamic. Again, that's deeply thoughtful, slow process and open discussion kind of territory. You can't do that quickly at your desk in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the other thing about that side of it is at the start of the process, we explain what the collaborative process is all about, and we give the clients expectations of what they can expect along the actual process. And then if we divert from that without telling them and telling each other, suddenly they start becoming disillusioned and start getting frustrated with us.
Yeah, very true. Very true. The difficult client was my third sort of key area where I see we can encounter impasse, challenges, whatever it may be. And when I was discussing this just before with Anne-Marie, she said to me, what is a difficult client, Clarissa? Or what isn't a difficult client? And that's a really valid point, because we know clients going through separation and divorce, massive grief, really difficult time in their lives, and who wouldn't be, in inverted commas, if you could see me right now, difficult in that moment. Like, it's such a difficult thing to be doing. And then to be in a space where you're very much in a room having to confront in a very present way some really tough stuff. It's no surprising that we see people and we can then potentially describe them as being difficult. I think, again, the key for me is to be aware of it and almost to normalise it, and to normalise it at the beginning. And I say to my clients at the beginning of a process, there'll be moments in this where you'll feel horrid, where things will feel really hard, where you're going to feel really overwhelmed. And so when you have those moments where they're feeling all or one of those things, you can say, remember, we spoke about this. This is really normal. This is expected. This is what's going to happen.
I think clients are, it's safe to say, I think clients are floundering at this point in their lives. And if you then put them into a collaborative process that you don't have very clear control of in terms of the parameters, it's just letting the blind lead the blind in a highly emotionally charged environment. If you have the process rock solid in your mind and you can be flexible about the issues, you have some chance of guiding the client. One of the things that you learn, and we've talked about this in the context of screening, is how problematic one party really is only when you're 2 or 3 meetings into the process. And because everyone is on their best behaviour at the beginning, everyone understands the process and the goals and where interests fit within that. And then after a while you realise, you learn that one or other of them is genuinely problematic. And that can be a temptation then to divert from process. One of the things I've found helpful in those situations, and they come up reasonably regularly, sometimes it's my client, sometimes it's not. The thing that I have found helpful is to talk to the other solicitor and to say, I've got a problem. The likelihood that that problem is going to come as any surprise is almost non-existent, because your client would have been behaving like that in the process, and you'll all be feeling it. And you can both problem solve and offer an enormous amount of support to the other solicitor in those circumstances. And without diverting from process, you can take little steps like sharing with each other the need for your client to have some pretty robust advice and working out how you might do that without alienating that person or the other. But trying to work that out on your own is a really big ask.
I think potentially, the other thing to take into account is there are other factors that need to be taken into account. So we've had the odd client where the husband's had an affair or the wife's had an affair and it hasn't been put on the table. We're trying to move the matter forward, but that other party can't move forward because it hasn't been discussed. So there's an elephant in the room. What is the elephant in the room? What are they trying to achieve? What process through their grief are they going through? We've had matters where both parties come to the table and they're keen to move this forward very quickly. And then within a month, one party's backing right off and raising all these other issues. Why are they raising those issues? Are they being difficult, or is there something else we're not talking about?
Yeah. And I think, again, the key from almost what both of you are saying there is that capacity to, as a team, come back to having an open, curious conversation as a group around, I've identified this challenge and I actually don't know what the answer is. And what are your ideas about that? And, something Anne-Marie and I've been using lately in a matter where we've got some challenging dynamics is asking my client what she thinks about some of the dynamics and what she might know about how we could best assist with that. And so you're really using all of the tools in the room to best understand what you're dealing with. And a lot of these issues are not in pure law land, legal issues, but they are massive issues that will prevent your solution.
I think in many respects they're rarely in law land. They're more about...
I can tell you they're not in accounting land.
They're more about how people feel, and again, that's what you learn over time, because in the beginning they come saying, yes, legal process, I understand, this is where I'm going, and we say, actually, would you like to be a complete human in this process? And that's exactly what they become, and they remember why they were so disaffected in their relationship and what it is they hate about the other person and what event triggered it. And it's like an unraveling. They start off relatively superficial and good intentioned, and then it gets hard. And then you're really in.
Yes.
But that's where the team, and sometimes not just the other lawyer, but someone who is working in a way less hard in the meeting, so someone like John who's able to watch a lot more, can say, okay, this is what I've noticed. This is what's happening in the room. You know, women think we're very good at multitasking, but I know for me, when I'm in a meeting, if I'm also trying to take notes and listen to what is going on and watch my client, it's impossible. The thing
and there's studies have just come out saying women can't multitask.
No, there aren't. One of the issues that I've noticed lately is this Pandora's box of interest-based negotiation, and I'm not quite sure why it has become a really complex current issue for me. I don't know whether it's just the luck of the draw, and I've got a few matters where it's created issues where it hasn't before, or whether I just noticed them now. But essentially what's happened is I have some clients who have been very open and interest focused and really trying to think about things from the other's perspective, and the other hasn't. And that has created an enormous sense of discontent in my clients, and I field a great many questions of them saying, but this is what the process is about, and this is what I've been doing, and she has not been doing it, and I'm going to continue to have my say about this until they get on board. And they can't hear me say, she is not going to get on board because he or she can't for all sorts of complex reasons, and none of this is taking us anywhere. And of course, the resistance from the client about that is, but that's what this process is about. This is an interest-based process. And I have found that really challenging. In a case where there's a really, in all of the cases, I have worked very hard to have a good relationship with the other practitioner, but sometimes you just together can't come to a solution about that. What do you reckon you do about that? Team?
Thanks for that helpful thing. I think I don't have the answer to that. I'm going to be very frank. But one of the things that I know I do a lot with both of you is debrief and find mentors in the collaborative community. So take my questions outside of that process, obviously confidentially, and just try and have a conversation with someone else and get some ideas on different ways of approaching it, different things I can do. So for me, it's always about learning and always coming back to there must be a way through, and seeking help, seeking advice, asking others.
I think that's the thing about collaborative. We've found that the collaborative community that you individually work with is usually pretty small, as a regularly working with, and as a result, you'd actually develop a different rapport with those people that work there. That allows a level of honesty that you wouldn't normally have, and to raise more difficult conversations. I had one recently with Clarissa, and I wasn't over it. The outcome got where we wanted it to get to. The clients were happy with where the outcome was. However, we weren't necessarily happy. I wasn't happy with the way the matter ended up. And Clarissa and I had a hard conversation afterwards, and she said to me, I wasn't happy with the way it ended up, and I said, I was about to say that. And it's difficult to have those conversations, but you learn to have a level of respect and trust they've got a level of respect for yourself, that you can have those conversations and move forward.
And that they're also simultaneously feeling it.
Yeah.
Because it's that niggly discontent is unlikely to be just you.
Yeah. I think picking up on that, one of that difficult conversation that John and I had it at home. I think it was an evening or a morning, I can't remember, because my daughter was there. And you and I were talking, and I said, you rang me or I rang you, and our conversation started with me saying, I want to apologise to you. I'm not proud of what I did yesterday. I'm not proud of how that panned out, and I want to apologise to you. And when I got off the phone, London, my daughter said to me, what did you do wrong? Why were you saying sorry to John? What have you done? And it was actually really interesting, because then it enabled me to have a conversation with her around, well, we all do things that, with the benefit of hindsight, you wouldn't do, or you would change, or you would, would do something different. And she's all of 4. But I actually was really happy that it gave me an opportunity to say to her, it's okay to stick your hand up and go, you know what? I'm not proud of myself. That wasn't me. It's not how I do things.
But you know what, from a traditional role, there was nothing wrong.
That's right.
We did, from the traditional role, that's exactly how you played out.
Yeah.
We weren't happy with the way we interacted with each other.
Yeah.
From a client viewpoint.
With the benefit of a bit of distance now in hindsight for the two of you, do you think it could have ended any other way?
I think the dollar outcome or the physical outcome probably would have been very similar, but I think the feeling could have been very different. The mood, if I could call it that could have been very different.
Absolutely.
And that was really what John and I spoke about that day when we had that conversation, is where did we trip up? And in part, we tripped up by keeping people in separate rooms. We were like, oh, this is going to be hard process. This is going to be hard. And my reflection was, this is going to be hard for me. So let's put them in separate rooms. I think that was the wrong decision. Like, these meetings are always hard. Having everyone in a room when you're not always agreeing on things, whether it's lawyers, clients, accountants, it doesn't matter. Like life, when you're at home and you disagree with your husband or your wife, it's not pleasant, it's not easy. But actually being there and having the dialogue, I think, is more powerful than trying to have a dialogue almost via Chinese whispers, because it doesn't come the way it was intended, and it creates a whole new set of problems that otherwise could have very easily been dealt with by someone just going, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I'm trying to say. So for me, that was probably my big learning, and it's a process thing. It's a process, and that fear of conflict.
It's saying that I don't think it was incorrect having them in separate rooms. I think at times they should have been in the same room.
Yeah.
They should have, we were working hard on the clients on that day. And that's
So that's
not
a
right.
really
powerful thing.
important role, isn't it? Working harder than
We don't want to make it
clients.
uncomfortable for the clients. Now, in saying that, in that case, the wife had difficulty processing on the spot. So she needed to think about things without the pressure there, but we could have dealt with that. And to a certain extent, he was the same as well.
Yes.
He may have actually accepted things which he shouldn't have accepted if everyone's in the same room. But yeah, hindsight.
Did you have a social scientist involved?
We did, and that was one of the other things we then spoke about, is we didn't have that person there on that day because it's a financial case by this point.
Yeah.
We don't need that person.
And that's what the thing about this matter, it started out, a long time ago
Yeah.
as a very different matter, and it took a very different course with the children being dealt with, and then a year later the financial side
Yeah.
kicked in,
Yeah.
and there was sort of a history there that it was
I
a
asked,
little bit of a funny matter.
I asked that question because, certainly speaking for myself, I think social scientists are much braver at keeping everyone in the same room, probably because they have some tangible skills in managing that palpable conflict, and also in assessing very quickly the kind of processor that each client is, and being able to say, okay, you just need to pipe down for a moment because this person over here needs a bit more time to process what's just been said. But that doesn't mean storm off into another room and create a vacuum.
Yeah.
You just let that happen. But that is a good, we talked about this idea of neutrals. It's a good role for the social scientist, but it's a hard sell when you've morphed into a purely financial
That's right.
matter.
That's right.
And it brings me to that thought process about at what point do we have to have the skill and the capacity to step outside what's happening and notice what's happening, and to say, this is something else could be done now. Could something else be done? Do we have to, no matter how uncomfortable it is, get these people back in the same room? But the reason why that's such a big ask is that you're also flooded with cortisol and stress.
Yeah.
And on top of that, a layer of frustration that this isn't the process we should be using. And there's a whole lot of self-judgment going on about how you got to that point. And one of the expressions that I really remind myself of in all contexts, not just in collaborative work, is one of you should aim to be, if necessary, the only person in the room with a functioning prefrontal cortex. In other words, someone has to have the capacity to dial it down. And that is really hard.
Yeah.
I know the theory. I have no idea how to implement the practice. So then I tell myself one of my favourite Zen proverbs: from the moment you realise you're asleep, you're already half awake. Still doesn't help. I like it.
Nice
I think
segue.
that's the other thing, is you're also heavily invested in your clients.
That's right.
Yes.
And this, through that interest-based negotiation, trying to unpack everything, you're getting one side of everything.
Yeah.
And the process has made you potentially more invested than you would be in a traditional model,
Yeah.
because you're helping this person as a complete entity, not just a legal proposition again. So how do you engage that prefrontal cortex?
The other key area where I see things become really tricky is when there's conflict in the team. So often there's conflict between the clients. That's expected. That's the norm. We can all deal with that. But when there's conflict between the professionals in the team, that for me has been an area where I've seen matters become problematic. And it's a hard one. It's a really hard one.
Yeah, and I think conflict within the team comes from a great many places. And again, if you've got really close working relationships with your collaborative peers, you'll have better, closer friendships with some than with others. And I know from my own perspective, there is always a dynamic that I'm aware of. I work differently with different people. When I reflect on that myself, what I realise is that in some of those dynamics, I take a back seat and I let the other person drive a lot. And then I find myself wondering, is this in my client's interests? Should I be taking a more stronger stance at the front? I think John's looking at me aghast, wondering how I could ever take a quiet backseat. But I know that happens. And then what I've noticed is that when I do have to push back, it's a bit of a shock.
Yes.
And it creates a level of conflict that didn't exist because I was quietly going about my business. So conflict is deeply complex, I think. And then if you've had a less than ideal personal experience with the other practitioner, perhaps in a litigious matter the week before, or in some other professional or a personal context, it's very difficult to check all of that at the door.
Yes.
From my point of view, I guess I'm the one who gets to sit back and look at the two lawyers work together, and that we talk about being the choreography of the team. The dynamic between particularly the lawyers is, if they work well together, they dance together, they bounce off each other, they support each other, they see what the other client's doing, and vice versa. It flows, and you end up getting, if there's a problem in the room, both solicitors are working together to solve that, along with the team. But if you haven't got people on the same page, it is just like drawing teeth working through the matter.
What are some tips, John, that you can give us? Because there will be times where you're not bouncing off each other, where the matter doesn't allow it, where the relationship
You know what?
doesn't
I think
easily provide.
there's usually a theme in place. That theme is, if there haven't been debriefs, if there haven't been planning, if there haven't been sort of setting agendas, if there's been a lot of time between meetings, if there hasn't been good, strong communication, if there hasn't been support to the clients as a team, I think all of those factors seem to rear their head every time there's a lack of choreography between the team.
I think, Stu, one of my little comments and learnings on this is it is what it is. And so sometimes you can push and you can pull and you can try and you can debrief and you can plan and you can set meetings and you can do everything you can. But for whatever reason, if the other practitioner is just not on the same page as you, you can only do what you can do. And I come back often and say to myself, this is the best it's going to be. I still firmly believe that collaborative, in whatever strange form, is one of the, in my head, the best process for separating families. So I often will then say to myself, well, if this matter was in any other forum, just imagine the difficulty that this would be playing out, whether it's the client, the practitioner, whatever it is. And for me, whether that's just my own self finding a rationalization for craziness, I don't know. I find it helps me to go, okay, hang on, bring it back. What is this case about? What is this file about? How can I do the best in this scenario with these people? What's going to work today? Because you can't always create the perfect process. It is what it is.
And I guess I can't compare that outside the collaborative room, because outside the collaborative room or the collaborative matter, I don't have this type of role.
Yes.
So I don't see it.
Yes, cool.
John, in your role, do you always know much about the relationship between the two lawyers?
No, not at all.
And would it help you to know that?
Yes, it would help. You can pick it up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I bet you can. But I wonder what the role of someone, a neutral, who's, you know, who would appear to be there to crunch some numbers, but who can offer a whole lot more, could benefit from in the beginning.
Ideally, before the matter kicks off, the team sits down and talks about how the matter's going to run and experiences. Through that process, you probably pick up a fair bit. But quite often, I find when the team is not an optimal team, those meetings don't tend to happen.
So all of these points that we've been talking about stem from that one common theme of conflict.
Yes.
And the theorists about conflict like to view it as opportunity. And that's something I often think about. This is a source of tension and conflict. What can we do with it? But we as lawyers are trained to view that as totally negative. And one of the things I'd be really interested to hear from those of you who are listening is what have you done to frame it as an opportunity rather than an obstacle? And one of the things I was thinking about that led me to ask that question is that what do you do when you have a client who has formed a view about the other lawyer? Not so much about their spouse, but about what the other lawyer is or isn't or should or shouldn't be doing. Because I think that's often it's a question that's asked in all matters. What's the other lawyer advising them, telling them? I find that a particularly challenging conversation, because in a traditional matter you can say, let's not worry about that. We'll never know, we'll never understand it. Don't get inside that headspace. But in the collaborative process, they have much greater direct exposure to the other lawyer.
So we talk about the team working together, the solicitors and neutrals working together for both the clients. But what happens when one of the solicitors just does not get on, does not gel with the other client? And I've seen a couple of those matters that's happened, and unfortunately, two of them fell over for that very reason. The client couldn't work with the other solicitor.
And there might be very good reason for that.
That's interesting. Okay. I'm going to move us forward. So a couple of examples, and I'll move a bit quickly through this because we want to get more to the how do we avoid some of these challenges. A few of the things, the examples where I think things go wrong, and we've spoken a little bit about some of these, is as lawyers particularly, we tend to resort back to letters or in this day and age emails. And it's a time thing. I think there's a feeling that, oh, if I just flick this off, it'll be easier, they'll have it, whatever it is. But again, one of the things that we teach when we're introducing people to collaborative is to avoid letters, avoid the writing, because as lawyers we tend to write in a way that's pretty blunt, that can be pretty direct, often quite rude,
offensive.
Yeah, and it's rarely helpful. So sometimes that quick email that you send off because it's just easier creates a whole new level of conflict and division that you probably didn't need had it just been in a conversation.
Or sometimes the clients, if you've had an exchange in the beginning of email addresses and we say we're all going to communicate with each other about information that you've been sent off after the meeting together.
Yes.
And then you have that situation where a client doesn't like the other lawyer and sends something that that's going to take some undoing.
Yeah, I've had a bit of that lately, actually.
Clients resorting to, maybe not letters, but to emails and texts, which just get, because it's cold, it's just it's the way it's being written.
Yeah,
they've got such buy-in to the process that they feel comfortable doing that, which on the one hand is a sign that the process is working. But I think it's easy to underestimate how much filtering we still do in that process, even if it's just in reframing of language.
Yes.
Because you can see in an instant how that starts.
I've had clients show me texts and they say, look at this, look what he sent me, and you read it and go, yeah. What's the problem?
Are you upset about that typo?
Yeah, that's right. And we do that as lawyers too. I'll often get things in here collaborative or otherwise, and I'll go to one of my friends down the hall and say, look at this horrible thing. And they'll be like, what are you talking about, Clarissa? Because there'll be something else going on that's frustrating you.
So is the answer to that, don't resort to letters?
So I think, yes, I'd be asking why am I sending this as a letter first? And then secondly, something that you and I've been doing lately is we ring each other first and say, what do we think will be the most useful way of presenting this information? And we have in a matter lately been using correspondence, because we have clients that need to take things away and think about it, but we're mindfully preparing that correspondence almost together in a way that, how is this best going to present to do what we're trying to do in this case, as opposed to create more division. So I think, again, it comes back to the overarching theme with all of this stuff. Pause and think about why you're doing it that way and what is the purpose of it.
And can I just give an example of why that helps so much? Our role as lawyers in the collaborative process is to be an advocate, but you're the most effective advocate if what you are articulating is actually heard by the other party. And if what the lawyers do is have a conversation that says, this is what my client needs to say, and the other lawyer says, if you could start with point 4, that'd make point 1 much easier to digest, then you can articulate something that the other party actually hears and can consider. You can't do that on your own. It's not about the lawyer who's going to be receiving it with their client saying, oh no, you can't say that, you can't do that. It's about how you frame it.
Yeah. The old separate rooms, we spoke about this before. This is a real, I think, trick. It can sometimes be so useful though as well. So it's a tool that we will often use when, for whatever reason, things just need some space, some time, some thought. But I think, again, it's not your default position. So don't fall into the trap of back into good old legal positional bargaining, other lawyer mediation style of process where you just go people in separate rooms and away we go. I think I'd be pausing and reflecting and asking the question, why are we in separate rooms? And in my experience, if you ask your clients what they prefer, they'll 99.9% of the time say separate rooms because it is easier. So that's probably not the place to go in terms of your first conversation. Like, you need to have the conversation with the team and do the pros and cons analysis of why do we think this is a good idea. And then I think try and, again, be mindful as you're going through the meeting. One of my learnings recently is always be reviewing whether that is still the best thing. If you've done that for a little while, namely a couple of hours, and it's not really working, I'd be asking myself, is this still the best way forward? Because it may not be delivering what you thought at the time.
And I was thinking about that old adage, it's probably totally inappropriate in the context of separated couples, but don't go to bed angry. If you have a period of separation during the course of a meeting, I think you are far more likely to get things back on track if you come together, even briefly, at the end and also at the beginning to discuss why you're going to do that.
Yeah.
But that you close off on the process in its perfect model as an unspoken way of encouraging clients to get back to the model.
I say that separate rooms thing. One thing I tack onto that, and it's probably more from probably my role as a financial neutral, is that preparation. How much preparation you do outside of the room, and it's something we do a lot now from a financial viewpoint, is to run through, here it is, here are some different pathways, let's do some option generation and what possible issues could come up. So from that point of view, when you actually get into the joint room, when an issue comes up, we've almost got pre-prepared answers. We've thought about what we could do. And if the other side is doing the same thing, and quite often I'll do it for both, depending on the issue, both parties, you've almost, again, that choreography, you've almost gone back to both parties. We've gone the to and fro, but in separate rooms with me and usually the solicitor. So when you come to the room, it's basically just flowing through what you've already worked through.
And that's one of the best examples or illustrations of why the collaborative process is not necessarily less expensive than anything else, because the amount of time that you spend with your client and with others in properly preparing for those meetings is significant. And some clients are particularly needy and require many consultations between meetings in order to get into a position where they can hear and process instantly in a way. It's like the idea of being an overnight success, isn't it?
Isn't that how it works? I thought that was how it worked. No meetings, similar to the separate rooms. We move into a space where we go, oh, look, the meetings are getting expensive. So let's not do that. Let's do something else. And again, in my experience, the something else is probably more expensive than the meetings in the first place. So just again, coming back to that idea of trying to custom design your process because you think it's going to be easier, ask yourself, why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? Will this actually be easier in the long run? No meetings, in my experience, is not always the best way. Having a break is a good idea, but a break should probably mean a break. And then again, be some purpose to the break.
And some parameters around that.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the no meetings one, I fell into this a couple of weeks ago. We're at the stage we're going through, we're valuing the group, trying to put into the clients, working through different pathways with the clients. The wife was in no way ready for the meeting. She was raising other issues. We were going to go back and look for further information. The husband was desperate to have a meeting and wrap this thing up by 30 June. We said, all right, look, we're not ready for the joint meeting. It's going to be a settlement meeting. We're not ready for that. We won't have it. And one of the solicitors said, my client's not going to accept that. We have to have a meeting. There must be stuff we can talk about. We're going to have a meeting just to placate the husband. So we came up, we talked about it as a team. We came up with an agenda that in hindsight, we needed that meeting. But what became interesting is halfway through the meeting, the client said, I want to make an offer. And
Which client? The one who wasn't ready?
They'd actually both mentioned it, but one of them said in the actual room. So we actually put them in separate rooms to talk about a few things at that stage. And then the offers started coming across. And all of the things that the wife had raised, she was interested in, but she was happy to park if the number was right.
Yeah.
And they were both within their parameters. They both met their interests, and we settled that meeting. And I was stunned. I was basically saying we had nothing to talk about in the meeting, and here we are. We had the meeting. We weren't fully prepared for that meeting, but knew where we fell down. And the client settled it. The clients wanted to settle it.
Who decided that she wasn't ready?
We had a meeting with her 2 days beforehand, and she said, look, I've got all of these issues. I want this. We talked about, and we need this information to look at that. He was hiding money. He was doing all this. They were material issues.
But the reason why I asked that question is, why does that mean she's not ready for a meeting?
Because they both said, they were both she was extremely conscious of costs and wanted everything had to hit them. He couldn't give two hoots.
So they wanted to be ready to talk turkey.
They wanted the next meeting to be bang. This is it.
Yeah. Interesting.
One of the, I think, ways that you can get into not trouble, but that gets challenging in relation to meetings is where you've got some geographical distances, and it seems tempting to do things with one party in a room and one party on a phone, or do too much in a big, long series of meetings. John and I had a matter very early on in our collaborative practice experience where geography was a big problem, and we, in hindsight, tackled it in a way that was comfortable for us because we're all used to staying focused on these things for days on end, but which didn't work for the clients. So that's really worth thinking about. What do you do if distance is a factor? Can you have an effective collaborative meeting via Skype or the phone? And I think there's some basic communication challenges with that, but I suspect that's going to be a growing part of our practice.
Yes, technology. Well, I think we've spoken probably enough about what I'll call the lawyer traits coming out. I'm going to jump forward. And I said this when we began, mistakes are normal. Mistakes are really normal, and mistakes are how we all learn. Everything in life, collaborative, is just part of that. So I think we have to embrace mistakes, and we have to be able to pause and reflect. And that's the only way we learn. I know I'm a much better collaborative practitioner now than I was when I began this work about 10 years ago or so, because I'm learning. And I like to think that I have the capacity each time I do something to pause and say, right, what could have been done differently? What worked really well in that matter? What didn't work so well in that matter? And what could I do differently? So I think don't be afraid of making mistakes. It's your capacity, though, to pause and reflect that's key. And speaking frankly, our profession as lawyers, we're not great at that. We're not really taught that. We're not encouraged to do it. You're not encouraged to, stick your hand up and say, oh, did the wrong thing or could have done that better. It's not something that's really innate within us. So it's a pretty hard thing to do. And I think you also need to pick the right people to do it with, because some people will take advantage of that. So you can't, with every person you're working with, stick your hand up and say, look, as I did to John, I'm really sorry, I'm not proud of what I did. And I probably wouldn't have been able to have that conversation with everyone. It's because you and I are good friends, and from a friendship level, I was really disappointed in myself. But that's not a call that I could make to a lot of people. And because I think, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable space when you do that. So it's picking and choosing. And my other tip on that is fundamental. Find someone that is doing this sort of work that perhaps is a bit different to you in terms of their skill sets, and be able to debrief with them. And they're probably going to be not in your process. So that, you might need a couple. You might need more than one. We just had a question from Hayley as we've been talking there. When you're having difficulties gelling with other practitioners, how can you overcome this? So Hayley, for me, I go back to my mantra in life, which is kill them with kindness. And I go back to a place of curiosity, really trying to understand that person, understand who they are, know what's going on in their life. What does their week look like? What does their day look like? What are their values? What sort of person are they? And in my view, the only way you can get to know people is to spend time with them. So, and try and do that in more of a social setting. So try and ask questions about who they are as a core person, not who they are as a lawyer or an accountant or a social scientist, but who are they? What do they do? What do they do with their family? What do they like doing on the weekend? That's one of my favorite questions if I'm trying to learn about someone is, what were you doing last weekend? And it'll give you an in to a conversation about something that has nothing to do with work.
And the other side of that is a bit of self-reflection. What do you like? What is compatible with them? What is deeply incompatible, which is something you should likely steer away from? And try to forget your past experiences and be optimistic that they are committed to the collaborative process as much as you are, and that you both know you're going to have to try harder on an interpersonal level than you might have had to if you were gladiating.
No, they actually may be having trouble gelling with you.
Yep. So it's that reflection.
Impossible.
Clearly.
Can I just say something about sharing your struggles with the other practitioner? I've done that with several, more than one practitioner, and it has never, my fears about doing that have never been realised. It has never blown up in my face. It has never been taken advantage of. It has been met with, in a way, gratitude of thank you, because that's what's triggered the problem solving about the dynamic, and it's preserved ongoing relationships. So although it's deeply uncomfortable and things that you would never do in any other kind of process, it's a great relief.
Really helpful.
And at the end of the day, if you can't overcome that, are you going to give your clients the best performance as a team?
Yeah. So moving on to the more optimistic part of today, how do we avoid some of these common pitfalls? The most obvious one, we've all spoken about it, use your team. When you've got a John in the room, yes, John's there because of his skill with dollars and spreadsheets and Excel, and you're great, that's, don't get me wrong. But actually what John brings to a process, in my experience, is so much more than that. And just having a person in the room that isn't innately connected to either of the clients is so powerful. So whether the neutral is a financial neutral or a social science neutral, so powerful, so helpful. They will often see and feel things that when you're there advocating for your client, it's much harder to do. Use your
and we can say things that the others can't. We can get away with stuff.
Yes, so true, so true.
Yeah, because your interest, you don't have that vested interest, that advocacy role. The other thing a team can do is remind you that this is a time and place struggle, that you might be in a particularly challenging matter and that there's nothing you can do to improve it except just try your hardest to get to that point of resolution. That if you've got other people saying, yeah, this is difficult, this is taking everything we've all got, you don't have to feel disheartened with the process completely. Just remember it's temporary.
Yeah.
With the team, and this is something, again, it's happened from time to time and we get whacked in the face every time. You can't go from one meeting to the next meeting without doing some work.
Why not?
You need to, there's going to be a to-do list from the last meeting. There's going to be preparation for the next meeting. There needs to be discussions with the client. What's happening with the client going into the meeting? Where are their heads sitting at going into that next meeting? And what do you expect? What are the issues that are going to come up and what options we've got to resolve those issues? Do some planning beforehand.
I think that's right. Preparation, because if you're not prepared, you're letting so many people down. And that will be a trigger for conflict, I can guarantee it, and that will be a trigger for problem. If you've got someone that consistently is turning up to meetings and has not done the back end work that they said they were going to do, whether it's a practitioner or a client, it will cause a problem, guaranteed. And then you're going to be dealing with that fire in the room as opposed to dealing with whatever's going on. And I think that's right, John. We book these meetings and we think, okay, well, that's good. We've got 4 weeks to get to the meeting. And then it's 2 days before the meeting and you're suddenly going, oh, where's that to-do list? And oh, golly, where's that stuff? And life's taken over. And if you haven't sort of done it, it's going to be a problem. So again, that will happen. It happens to all of us at some stage. Be honest and upfront about it before you even begin. Don't try and sort of hide the fact. Be clear. Check in with your team at that point, see whether the meeting should proceed, whether it should be postponed. Like, think about it. Think about what's the right thing to do right now.
Know how to wrangle yourself.
Yeah.
You're in a taxi on the way to the meeting. You're going to meet your client there. The meeting's going to start 30 seconds after you arrive and you've just hung up the phone and raced out the door. How do you get yourself in the zone? Because if you bring forward your own stress levels and you're not in the zone, there'll be you'll have a different kind of meeting.
I think every one of us is busy in what we do. To actually front up these meetings and think, you're not going to have problems at some point.
Yeah.
From a time point of view or even sort of an emotional investment point of view. Are you in the right mindset when you actually rock up to these meetings? It takes a bit of self-awareness to realise, I'm not in the best way right now because my head's still thinking about that case I've got tomorrow or this matter that's due or the kids are doing this or I'm having a fight with my wife or whatever it might be. You've got to be sort of fairly self-aware, again, to provide your best service to those clients and to the team.
Yeah, and that's some days really easy and some days really tough. Yeah. All right. Other thing is talk about it. That's my other tip, talk about it. If there's a problem, if you foresee a problem, pick up the phone and talk to your team about it. And you don't have to have the answer. It's enough to just throw it out there and say, I think this is happening. I'm not sure. I just don't know the answer. And it comes back again to that place of curiosity and genuinely trying to get to the root cause or what is actually going on. And the others might say, I don't think anything's going on. I don't know what you're talking about. And you need to reflect upon that as well, like whatever the feedback is. But having the conversation is key. Having the conversation 5 minutes before starting a meeting is completely not key. So having that, again, the timing of those conversations, booking them in, giving yourself the time to be there and be present and be involved, really helpful. And sometimes they're better to have in person than over the phone or whatever else is going on. They've got nothing to say about talk about it. that's just beautifully
I've just got a
ironic.
song in my head. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. So I'm lost to you all now.
My other tip in terms of avoiding common pitfalls is constantly be building your skills. And for me, part of that is reflection and part of that is education. So constantly be involving yourself in practice groups, training, courses, online learning, reading. I don't know. Anne-Marie and I waste many an hour of our life
We invest many an hour
in our
of our lives.
You invest, I waste many of my hours in trying to build my skills. But it's a constant thing, and I want to constantly be getting better. A great mentor of mine has a saying and a practice where at 10 a.m. every Friday he stops whatever he's doing and he asks the question of himself, how am I better this week than I was this time last week? What have I done in the past week that makes me a better person than I was last week? And I think I've really adopted that practice, and I think it's such a powerful thing to be doing, is pausing and saying, how in collaborative, how am I better at this now than I was the last time I did a matter, or whatever it may be, but just constantly reflecting and actively trying to build your skills.
And can I say it's not only for collaborative, it's shocked me how I've changed as a practitioner over the last 10 years with everything I'm doing. In things like the basic collaborative course, and I've attended probably 3, 4, 5 of those. I've trained in them. I've done the advanced courses. Every single time I get so much out of it, even if it's just sitting there hearing something and saying, I could have used that in this thing. I could have done that. And I changed my program and how I approach things.
Yeah. Other ideas from you two about ways, things, tips, tactics that people can use to avoid some of these challenges.
Team
Team is the main one.
Be ready. Don't fall apart when you hit them. They're going to happen. They're not catastrophic. The matter can resolve. Some matters will be more uncomfortable than others, and the more you talk, problem shared is a problem halved. The more you talk about it, the easier things become.
I think you said at the outset that every one of these matters is hard. Every matter is hard. I've never done a matter that's the same as another matter. I've never done a matter that something hasn't come up that we've actually had to sit down and go, how are we going to do this?
And what happens then is you get to the end and you did the legal drafting, you think, God, this is easy.
Yeah.
Who would ever have thought there was a relief? Just sit down to draft consent orders.
So I think that's our message. Don't be afraid of mistakes, impasse, challenges, whatever you want to call them. Don't be afraid of them. They're going to happen. When they happen, pause and reflect and use the resources around you. Use the people around you, use the team, use people outside of your team if you need someone else to bounce ideas off. One of the fallbacks and one of the most useful tools that Anne-Marie and I have used a number of times now when we've hit a serious impasse in a matter is to put it back upon the clients. And John said this beautifully before. You shouldn't be working harder than your clients. So put it back to them and say, we seem to have reached an impasse and here are the options that we see as a way forward. What do you want to do? And make it their decision, because I think we do become a little bit too quick to go, oh, we've got to solve this problem. That's our job. We're lawyers. Here we are, quick, they're here for us to solve this problem. And sometimes we shouldn't be solving the problem. We should be providing the options and letting them do that pro and con analysis. And if one of those options that you're tossing up is this process still the right process? That's okay. Have that conversation with the clients. Let them make that decision. Is this process still right for us? Well, what do the alternatives look like? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the costs. Let's talk about the time. Let's talk about what you may get at the end of those other processes, particularly litigation. Now you make a decision. Do you want to sit here for a few more hours or do you want to invest in that little adventure? And in my experience, most people choose to stay there, even if it's difficult to stay there, because the alternate is really tough and really hard and will deliver a very different looking outcome than what collaborative could give.
I also say every matter is going to be different. There's no one size fits all. You're going to customize the program for everyone because different things are going to come up.
Yes, completely. So, unless there's any more questions from people, we're coming to an end. Our next webinar is currently scheduled for the 17th of August. So we haven't actually worked out what on earth we're talking about on the 17th of August and we'll let you know. And if you have any ideas, please send them through to us. Any particular topics or questions. And other than that, I just wanted to say thank you. And thanks so much, John and Anne-Marie, for both coming out and hanging out in my happy office this morning.
Pleasure. Good
Always
to
fun.
talk to you, everyone.
And wishing you all a great Wednesday. Come find us online. Anne-Marie will have social media soon. She promises me.
I do
I'm
promise.
not even trying.
No, apparently we do at work.
That'll be worth listening into on the 17th of August.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.